Imagine walking across a cold Irish bog at dawn. The ground is soft under your feet. Mist hangs low over the black water. Every step feels uncertain, like the earth itself is breathing beneath you. Then suddenly, your spade hits something strange. Not stone, not bone, not wood. Something soft, something pale. You pull it out of the dark peat, and for a moment it makes no sense at all. It looks like a lump of fat, a strange block of food. And then comes the shocking truth. What you're holding is butter. Ancient butter. Butter that may have been buried in that bog for thousands of years. That is not a myth. That is not folklore. It is one of the strangest and most fascinating discoveries in Irish history. Across Ireland, people have found lumps of butter hidden deep inside bogs. Some preserved for so long that they connect us to people who lived nearly 3,000 years ago. And the question hits you immediately. Why would anyone bury butter in a dangerous, acidic, half-poisonous landscape where people, animals, and even entire secrets could vanish without a trace? At first, it sounds absurd. Butter belongs on bread. Butter belongs in a kitchen. Butter does not belong in the earth, buried under layers of black peat. And yet, ancient Irish people kept doing it. Again and again. For generations. Maybe even for centuries. That means this was not some accident. This was a practice, a decision, a survival strategy, or perhaps something even stranger. To understand why they did it, you have to step back into the world they lived in. Ancient Ireland was a land of beauty, but it was also a land of hardship. There were no refrigerators, no electric freezers, no sealed food factories. Every season brought risk. Every winter tested the strength of a household. If your food spoiled, that was not an inconvenience. It could mean weakness, hunger, or even death. Food was not just food. It was security. It was power. It was life. And in that world, butter mattered more than many people today could imagine. Butter was rich in energy. It could feed a family. It could be traded. It could be stored. It came from cattle, and cattle were one of the greatest measures of wealth in ancient Ireland. To have cows meant survival. To produce milk meant promise. To churn butter from that milk meant turning something fresh and fragile into something more useful, more valuable, and more lasting. In a wet, cold land where survival often depended on making the most of what you had, butter was not a luxury. It was a treasure. That alone helps explain why people wanted to preserve it. But it still does not explain why they chose a bog. And this is where the story gets even more surprising. To modern eyes, an Irish bog looks like the last place you would trust with anything valuable. It is dark, wet, unstable, and eerie. The ground can swallow your boots. Pools of black water sit still like mirrors. The air feels heavy. Even now, bogs have an unsettling quality, as if they do not fully belong to the normal world. In ancient times, that feeling must have been even stronger. These were places of danger and mystery. Places where a person could lose their way. Places where animals could sink. Places that seemed to hold onto anything dropped into them. But the very thing that made bogs feel frightening also made them powerful. Because deep inside a bog, the conditions are unlike ordinary soil. A bog is cold. It is wet. It is acidic. And perhaps most importantly, it contains very little oxygen. That matters because oxygen helps fuel the normal processes of decay. Warmth, air, and active bacteria break food down. But in the cold, airless depths of a bog, decay slows dramatically. The bog does not preserve everything forever, but it can hold onto organic material in ways that seem almost supernatural. So while ancient people may not have spoken in the language of modern chemistry, they clearly understood something important. They knew the bog could keep things. That changes everything. Suddenly, burying butter no longer looks foolish. It looks clever. It looks like ancient food science. It looks like people studying their landscape, learning its behavior, and turning a dangerous place into a kind of natural refrigerator. Think about how remarkable that is. Long before electricity, long before temperature-controlled storage, long before modern packaging, people in Ireland may have realized that the dark peat beneath their feet could protect food from rotting. They did not need steel machines humming in a kitchen. They had cold earth, acidic water, and generations of practical wisdom. But even that may not be the whole story. Because if bog butter was only about storage, why do archaeologists keep finding so many deposits that were never recovered? Why did people bury valuable butter and then leave it behind? Why were some hidden in wooden containers or wrapped with such care, only to remain underground for centuries? If this was simply a pantry, then why were so many treasures abandoned? Now the mystery gets deeper. One possibility is simple and deeply human. The people who buried the butter may have meant to return, but life got in the way. A family member may have died. A raid may have struck. A famine may have hit. A conflict may have forced people to flee. A storm may have changed the shape of the land. A marker may have been forgotten. Time may have swallowed the memory. Imagine that for a moment. A person stands at the edge of a bog with a container of fresh butter. Maybe it is the result of weeks of work. Milking cows, skimming cream, churning by hand, saving every bit. They lower it into the peat, trusting the earth to guard it. They plan to return when winter grows harsher or when a household needs it most. But they never come back. That lump of butter becomes a message with no receiver. A plan interrupted. A small hope buried in black soil. And that possibility makes bog butter far more emotional than it first appears. These are not just strange archaeological objects. These may be the remains of ordinary people trying to survive. Yet there is another possibility, and it is even more intriguing. Some researchers believe that not all bog butter was buried simply to be eaten later. Some of it may have been hidden for protection, perhaps from thieves or raiders. In a world where cattle and dairy had real value, storing butter in a hidden place made sense. A bog was difficult to access. It did not invite casual discovery. It could function as both storage and secrecy. In other words, the bog may have been part refrigerator, part vault. But even that still may not explain every case. Because bogs in Ireland and across Northern Europe have long been associated with ritual, mystery, and sacrifice. These were not ordinary landscapes in the minds of ancient people. Bogs preserve bodies, weapons, tools, precious objects. Some appear to have been offerings deliberately placed in the earth. That raises a powerful question. Could some bog butter have been given, not stored? Could have been an offering to spirits, ancestors, gods, or forces beyond the visible world. If that sounds dramatic, remember the mindset of ancient societies. Nature was not just scenery. It was alive with power. The land could bless or destroy. A harvest could fail. Cattle could weaken. Winter could kill. In such a world, offering something valuable to the earth was not irrational. It was meaningful. It was a way of speaking to the unseen. And what is more valuable than food, especially rich food, in a difficult land? So perhaps some of the butter was meant for hungry mouths. And perhaps some of it was meant for sacred silence. What makes the story even more incredible is that this was not a rare one-time event. Ireland has produced hundreds of bog butter discoveries. That means this was not one family's strange habit. This was a widespread tradition, a pattern, a practice so repeated that it stretched across centuries. Some finds have been dated to the Bronze Age. Others come from much later periods. That means the knowledge lasted. It was remembered, passed on, used again. Ancient Irish people did not stumble into this once and forget it. They kept doing it because it worked, because it mattered, or because it meant something powerful. And that tells us something important about the people behind the story. Too often, modern people look at ancient communities and assume they were simple, less informed, less clever, just people surviving by instinct. But bog butter destroys that lazy idea. This was not primitive nonsense. This was environmental intelligence. It was people observing their world closely enough to use a dangerous landscape in a sophisticated way. They understood preservation without calling it chemistry. They understood cold storage without building machines. They understood that survival often depends not on controlling nature, but on reading it carefully. That is genius, even if it does not look like modern genius. And then there is the emotional shock of the butter itself. When people picture ancient butter, they might imagine something golden and smooth, ready to spread. But bog butter does not usually look like that. After centuries underground, it can appear pale, waxy, crumbly, or cheese-like. Sometimes it looks more like a strange lump of tallow than food. Sometimes it carries a strong smell, earthy and sour, as if time itself seeped into it. That makes each discovery feel deeply unsettling. It is familiar and alien at the same time. Butter is ordinary, almost humble, but bog butter feels ghostly. It is a piece of daily life that somehow slipped through time. And that may be the most powerful part of the entire story. When archaeologists uncover a golden crown or a sword, we expect drama. Those objects belong to kings, warriors, and legends. But butter belongs to ordinary people, to farmers, to mothers, to workers, to families, to the quiet routines of life, which means bog butter gives us something rare. It does not just connect us to the powerful. It connects us to the everyday. Somebody milked the cow. Somebody skimmed the cream. Somebody churned the butter. Somebody shaped it with their hands. Somebody carried it into the bog. Somebody trusted the earth to hold it. And somebody, somewhere, expected it to matter. That person's name is gone. Their face is gone. Their home may be gone. But the butter remained. Not because it was meant to become famous, but because the bog refused to let it disappear. That is why bog butter feels so intimate. It is not only preserved food, it is preserved intention. And the more you think about it, the more moving it becomes. Maybe it was buried during a time of fear. Maybe enemies were nearby. Maybe winter was coming. Maybe a household was trying to secure its future. Or maybe a person stood in silence at the edge of a sacred place and lowered that butter into the bog as an offering, asking for protection, fertility, or mercy. Was it storage? Was it wealth? Was it ritual? Was it all of those things at once? The truth is, we may never know in every case. And that uncertainty is part of what makes this story so compelling. The bog preserves the object, but not always the explanation. It keeps the butter, but it swallows the full story. Still, what we do know is extraordinary. We know the Irish landscape was not just endured, it was understood. We know ancient people found practical uses in places others feared. We know a substance as ordinary as butter could become so important that people trusted the earth itself to protect it. And we know that thousands of years later, those buried choices are still speaking. That is why this story matters so much. It is not only about old food. It is about survival, memory, and the intelligence of people who live close to the land. It is about how the hostile-looking environment became a partner in preservation. It is about how something soft and perishable outlived the hands that made it. And it is about how history often hides in the smallest, strangest things. A sword tells you about conflict. A crown tells you about power. But a lump of ancient butter tells you about life. It tells you what people valued, what they feared, how they planned, how they adapted, how they tried to outwit time, hunger, and loss. And in a strange way, they succeeded. Because here we are, thousands of years later, still talking about their butter, still wondering about their world, still standing in awe of the fact that beneath the dark, wet skin of an Irish bog, one of the oldest survival stories in Europe was quietly waiting to be found. So the next time you hear the phrase bog butter, do not laugh too quickly. Behind that strange image is a story of human brilliance, hardship, and mystery. The Irish may have buried butter in a landscape that looked deadly, but they may also have discovered one of the most unusual preservation methods in history. They turned danger into storage, silence into memory, and ordinary food into a time capsule. And maybe that is the greatest twist of all. What sounds bizarre at first is actually a sign of deep wisdom. If this story changed the way you see ancient Ireland, then subscribe for more hidden Irish history, forgotten survival secrets, and mysterious traditions that most people never hear about. And tell me in the comments, what do you think bog butter really was? A survival trick, a hidden treasure, or an offering to something greater?